This time you're going to open up the Create Terrain from Elements tool or file. Go ahead and upgrade the file too. So here we're in a 3D file with 3D graphics. Actually, it looks like those graphics are live in the file, but they could be referenced in, they don't have to be live. These are just regular CAD graphics. These aren't survey, but it would work the same even if they were survey graphics or if they were civil elements. But what we're going to do is we're going to just do a big full selection set of all of those graphics. And so down at the bottom, you should see how many elements you're grabbing. So it looks like 1,222. And then we're in our terrain tab. So if you're not in the Open Roads modeling workflow, go ahead and go over there. And then we're going to go to the terrain tab, and under create, we're going to go create from elements. Now for this, I'm going to choose break line for all of these. And then for the edge method, I'll choose remove slivers. So that's kind of like the magic button that will go in and programmatically look for small slivers and triangles on the edge and remove those. And then for the feature definition, we'll choose existing triangles. So what you'll also notice is you've got these gray palettes. So as you use a feature definition, it's going to colorize, and that lets you know it's been copied into the file. So do existing triangles. And I'm going to call this existing for the name. Anytime you're typing in a name for a terrain, you're going to want to hit tab in there to lock it in. Otherwise, it'll normally just go back to the seed name, and you have to change that name manually afterwards. All right, now you're just going to data point to add the selected elements to the terrain, accept the feature type as break line, remove slivers, and then let that process. So this is just going to go and grab every single one of those elements and add it as a break line to the terrain. So this is probably not what you would want at first. What you would need to do is you would need to go in and create selection sets separately, where you would go grab your boundary features, add that in as a boundary. You would go select all of your break lines, add those in as break line features. And then you would go and select all your voids or your draped voids, maybe for your buildings, and you would add those in. So it turns into be a very manual process. So this is where we're going to use the graphical filters to help expedite the process along. All right, so go ahead and change files, and we're going to go into our Create Terrain from Graphical Filter. And we're going to have the same data set, but now we're going to use a filter to go in and create the terrain model a little bit more efficiently. Once you're in the file, you're going to go into your terrain tab again, but this time you're going to use the drop-down arrow next to From Graphical Filter, and then you're going to open up the Filter Manager first. So we have some in here already, just in our delivered workspace. This is what we recommend the designers to use to create their terrain models from for their proposed. But we're going to create our own filters here in this class. So we're just going to go up to the top under Filters, right-click, and we're going to create a new filter. You really have two options. You can create the filter manually, where you can go pick it by level or feature definition, whatever filter criteria you want to create the selection set. Or if you've manually created the selection set already, you can choose by selection, and it will just go ahead and select those for you. So we're going to just create a filter, right-click and rename it, and we're going to call this Buildings. then over here, for the description, we're going to call that building this as well, so I'm just going to copy that text and paste it down. And then for the feature type, we're going to assign that as a drape void. So what a drape void, the difference between like the drapes and the like a drape void or a regular void is that means that we're not using the X or we're not using the Z position of those elements to add them to the terrain. We're really just using the X, Y position of those boundaries, and we're draping them onto the terrain model. And we have the same thing with break line. Let's see. We have the drape void, and then we also have the drape boundary. I use the drape boundary all the time, more on the proposed side of things. So if you have some breaks in your boundaries, like your cut and fill lines, and they don't actually go all the way across, what you can do is you can create a shape, and it's like just a microstation shape inside to fill in all those gaps. And then you can use that boundary as your drape boundary to add to your terrain, and that's going to constrain all of your edge triangles to keep everything inside without having to have a profiled line all the way across. But we're going to set this to drape void. And now we also want to link this to the features. And what that's going to do is if the features move, our terrain is going to update. So you usually always want to have that turned on. And then we're going to go in and edit our filter. And we're going to filter this by level since we just have regular CAD graphics here. So it's going to scan your file. It's going to read what levels you have in here. We're going to go and grab our E structure building, and we're going to go and add that over to our selected side. So at this point, you can do a preview and see, what that's going to grab in your file. So you can see I'm missing a few buildings here that are probably on a different level, and that's intentional for the purpose of the class. They're going to show us how to change those features later. But it's always a good idea when you're building your filter to go and check your data set to make sure it's grabbing what you would intend it to grab. All right, so now with that selected, I'm going to click on Finish. And then I'm going to create one more filter here. So now I'm going to create all of my break lines. So we're going to right-click our filters again, create a new one. I'm going to rename that one to break lines. And I'll go ahead and copy that name down as well. We want to link the features, and I'm going to edit the filter. So the feature type should be set to break lines already. We're going to go down to levels. I'm just going to bring everything over so you can click on all. And then I'm going to bring back over my buildings. So I'm going to take my site and remove that, and then also the structure building. So both of those we're going to remove and push back over to the left column. And again, you can go and run a preview on that, see what that's going to select. And then we're going to click Finish. All right, now one more thing before we leave this dialog, I'm going to create a filter group. So when I create the terrain model, I could go and create it from an individual filter. But if I create a filter group, I can run all of those filters at the same time. So now I don't have to do it in multiple steps. So I'm going to right-click and create a filter group. I'm going to call this Training. And then in our selected filters, we're going to go in and just toggle on the filters we just created. All right, now once you have that in there, we're going to click Finish. And now we can go and run that graphical filter. So I'm going to run this in view 1, I believe. Yep. And we're going to go into our graphical filter dropdown, choose from graphical filter. And then in that to the settings dialog where it says graphical filter group, I'm going to go in and select the one we just created, which is probably going to have to scroll all the way to the top. Select Training. Again, we can run a preview. So I can already see I'm missing 2 of my features. So anytime you run this tool, you really do want to hit preview first. We're going to end up adding those in later. But for now, we'll go ahead and just click through this. So first I'm going to set my edge method. I'm going to use remove slivers. And then I'm going to set my feature definition to existing triangles. I'll go ahead and give it a name as well. We'll call this survey. Now, once you have all that set, we're gonna just left click through all of our prompts and let that process and create that terrain model for us. Now, let's look and see what happens when we move one of these buildings around. So I'm just gonna take a building and I'm gonna shift it over there. So you're gonna see it's gonna re-triangulate and update based off the movement of that feature. And that's because I'll link my features to my terrain model. I'm gonna hit undo here. I'm gonna delete this terrain model. So to do that, I'm just gonna select the terrain, go over and hit the X on that. And then now I'm gonna recreate it, but I'm gonna ignore the